Everybody make sure you're on mute. All right.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to More Action, Less Rhetoric, Equity Under a Microscope. I'm Dani Monroe, Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for Mass General Brigham, the largest private employer in Massachusetts with 80,000 employees, and I will be your moderator this morning. This week in Boston, we had a historic moment. We had the swearing in of the first Black female mayor, sworn in by the first Black Chief Justice, lead justice of our state Supreme Court. And the ceremony presided over by our first Black female Congresswoman from Massachusetts. I sat there in awe and amazement and pride as a Black woman watching these events. But I also had the thought about they have ascended to some of the highest offices in our state. And I wondered about how they managed equity and what do they have to do going forward, especially our mayor, in terms of managing equity and dealing with the challenges of equity on a daily basis. So this morning, we're going to have a conversation about equity. We can't answer those questions for those women, but we can begin to answer the questions about how equity plays itself out in our organizations and in our personal lives. And we have an incredible panel this morning to help us with that conversation and discussion. We have Shawna Wade, who is the head of Inclusion, Diversity at State Street Corporation. Shawna Ferguson, the Managing Director and Director of Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Wellington Management. And I've had the privilege of watching Shawna's career evolve over the last number of years, and she's become amazing in this field. And then the esteemed Don Frazier-Bohnert, who's the EVP and Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Liberty Mutual. So welcome, ladies, and we look forward to hearing your conversation. So I'd like to begin with the question around, why did you get into this work? What inspired you? Nobody grows up to be a Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, right? So why? What is it that got you in it and keeps you in it? And we'll just start with it being open. Right. Start, Shawna, you want to start? You have about a minute and a half to talk about it.
Yes, Dani, thank you. So I would say for me, this has been a personal journey. Let's say I was motivated to get involved in this work through both a positive and a not so positive experience as a young college student intern. So I interviewed for a role that I thought was going to be an HR assistant internship at a national hotel in the Boston area back in my undergraduate days. And in the middle of that internship, a series of questions pursued to the point where the interviewer was asking me if I wanted a head housekeeping internship. And so that opened my eyes that, oh, wait, you know, that was the 1990s and we're still doing things like that. And then I would say the positive side is I got a chance to see role models, women like yourself, Dani, and others who are registered with us today that showed me that we can go from that intern experience to leaders of civic engagement, leaders of corporations. So to me, I got triggered and frustrated by that intern experience, and there's nothing better. You know me, Dani. If you really want to get me behind in something, trigger an emotion in me. Yeah. So that's for me. It was a personal journey, and I wanted to be the role model of change.
Okay, thank you. So Don, I see you shaking your head, and
I am.
and so affiliating with Shawna, what she's saying.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. And I'm so happy to be spending my Saturday morning with this amazing group of women. I have to say, for me, it was really life experience. I was fortunate at the time, probably didn't think so, but to grow up really being a citizen of the world. I was an Air Force brat. My father's in the Air Force. So for many of you who have similar experience, you know what that means. You move, you know, every 2 years, no question asked. And that gave me the opportunity at an early age to experience what it means to not fit in or always be the other, always be the outsider. Yeah. And to really try hard, if I wanted to have any friends and have any kind of a, you know, a little social life, to figure out the unwritten rules and to figure out how do I fit in and why is there so much difference around either language or culture or food or what I'm wearing. And at the time didn't realize that that would lead me to this place. But, you know, when I think back now, of course, as we talk about the importance of belonging and feeling a part of and feeling like you can contribute and feeling like, you know, you can feel good about who you are and what you bring. All of those things that I personally felt and at times triggered by painful challenges, I think has made me a more compassionate, empathetic practitioner. And then really understanding how you apply all those things in a system like an organization have really kept me in this work and really kept me feeling like it's so necessary for all of us.
Okay. So, Sharhea.
Thank you, Dani. Good morning to everyone. For me, this is all about, this really kind of led me to, I'm the newest to this work in terms of title and position, but I will say a lot of it led into being the first of many things. And so when I say at first, you know, I was the first in my family to be born in the US. I was the first in my family to graduate from high school and go on to college in my immediate family, you know, so that was the led into that. And then this is kind of my third career at a company that I've been born and bred in essence, in my career, financial career. So I started in investment management and being the only, right? So switching now from being the first, but then now to being the only on the trading floor, being the only woman, being the only, you know, Black person on this trading floor full of white males in an industry. I started in municipal bonds and corporate bonds and being an analyst and not seeing anyone like me when I went to conferences and just kind of feeling like, do I belong here? You know, that sense of belonging that just disappears. So that's really where my passion for the work came in and just kind of like went, you know, making sure there's a pathway you know, coming up after that. And so what happened and led into me now being this on this journey to being in this position under Paul Francisco has been an amazing experience for me because my experiences on the trading floor wasn't all that positive, right? And so I had all the racist, the biggest, everything that the isms that you can possibly think of sat on the trading floor or was at every conference that I went to, and the expectations that people put on you to say, you know, you're only here because of X, Y, and Z. You're not here because you actually have the skills. And so I knew I wanted to change that dynamic for folks in State Street specifically. And so like that accountability that we also have to give to our managers and to our employees, et cetera. So that definitely was how I led into this work.
Okay, so thank you. So what I hear in the commonality is really the sense of isolation, other, having to prove yourself. And with that, a big part of being a chief diversity officer is having the tool of empathy, so you can advocate for others, no matter who those others are. And in that, bring equity into conversations, perhaps that other people aren't bringing. So with that is, what is equity? I mean, when I started this work, and I won't tell you how long ago that was, but it was before we called it diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? We didn't talk about diversity, we didn't talk about inclusion, we certainly didn't talk about equity. We did talk about race though. But now we have brought equity into the conversation and into the dialogue, into the discipline. So what is equity? Just help us understand that. So we have foundation to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump in.
Sure.
I think for many people, they confuse equity with equality. And we were talking about equality, equalness, equal opportunity for a long time, going way, way back to the days when I kind of started in this space. But at Liberty, when we talk about equity, we're talking about equal access. And we have been on a journey for the last, 8 years in terms of a really focused strategy and really pressed on D&I. Last year, we put E, equity, into our office because we were ready, we believe, to really drive deeper into this work to really make the D&I more impactful. And that really means looking at your systems, your practices. You think you have created equity, you think you've created equality, that everybody has opportunity. And often what you find is no, that there are barriers in place. And now what we're saying is we're doing the hard work to really unpack all of our practices, all of the things that we put in place and never intentionally keeping anyone out. But as we look deeper, we find there may be barriers where people don't have the equal opportunity to get promotions or have the same networks or have the same opportunities. So in many ways, we're saying now we're really doing the hard work to actually move us forward in that space. And
So, sure.
I'm sorry, Dani, I was just going to say, we just established ESG. Many organizations are setting up their environmental, social governance offices, and they may look different, but equity is a big part of that work. And as we look at equity, it's not only just internal, it's also thinking about the customers that we support and the communities that we support, and looking at our products or our services being received equitably by all people.
And so I'm going to ask you to go into that in some depth a little bit later, Dawn, so we can get a good feel for it. But in terms of Shari and Shawna, what can you add to the definition of equity as it plays out, so that State Street or at Wellington Management, or just the definition in general? Right.
Absolutely, Dani. Thank you. And I'm going to say yes and to Sister Dawn here. So she's absolutely right. It is looking at your systems. It is looking at your practices and your policies. We differentiate between three very common terms that are being used in this season of DE&I, and that is the equality, the equity, and justice. And so at Wellington Management, we're looking at equality, much like Dawn said, equal opportunity or equal employment opportunity. So making sure everyone can see, let's say, for example, your job postings, so that they all have a chance to bid on internal mobility, internal movement. But where equity differentiates for us, last year in 2020, we launched a program under the belief that there are different strokes for different folks. And so our program is called Groundbreakers Academy, and it takes a twist on equity to say, what do individuals of difference need in order to excel and thrive in our environment? What are the skills? What are the professional qualifications? So to me, a great example of equity is not a one-size-fits-all development program, but it is a customized to individual needs. So looking at your development plans and your programs. And then justice for us is really removing those obstacles. What is getting in the way of women, since we're all here together as sisters from other misters here? What's getting in the way of the women getting to the top? For us in our organization, that's getting the managing director, getting a partner. We have our first CEO, Jean Hines, first female CEO, Jean Hines, coming in this July. So how do we make sure that that type of momentum keeps going? If there are any obstacles from others becoming future Jeans, then it's our job to make that happen. So that's what I would add to Dawn's definition.
Okay. Sharhea, do you want to add or?
Well, I wouldn't add, I would just kind of just break it down a little simpler in terms of, making the description go back to what D is and then what the I is, and then think about what the E is. And so the D is, I guess, the analogy that everyone likes to use is the party, right? So the D is about actually making sure we invite everyone to the party, whether that's gender, race, we think of the spectrums that we use in diversity and inclusion specifically. Inclusion is making sure that everyone enjoys the party, feel belong, they're there. And then when I think of the E, this is where what Shawna was talking about is like making sure that there's targeted approaches to make sure all feel like they belong, that they are included, that they can dance at the party, that they can come to the party. Do we have wheelchair accessibility? Do we make sure we have different languages or different music there to make sure everyone feel comfortable in that same room, and that opportunity is there to enjoy themselves. And so that's how I think of D, E, and I when I think of using the same analogy that we've always used. And going back to what Dawn said, we've done a lot of work in the D and the I, but the hard part is that E, where we're talking about access that is very specific to a large difference. And then the intersectionality of it too. So we haven't even got there, being a Black woman in that space. So we're talking about a woman, and then we're talking about being Black, and all of those pieces, I think, is what makes equity so hard.
So what does it look like and feel like? I'm a SVP. I think I have equity. I've risen to the top of my organization. I've been fortunate in that way. How do I know I'm experiencing equity, right? So help us understand how it manifests in an organization, because sometimes we don't know. And if we don't know what it looks like, then we will not know what we're missing, or what we should be striving for.
Dani, I think that's so key. It's not just numbers. I mean, we certainly, all of us, I'm sure, have incredible management strategies, measurement strategies, in order to look at where are the gaps in terms of, where our hiring or our promotion. And those are all very key to help us really understand where we have opportunity for major improvement. But I would also say, and I've been thinking a lot about this, especially in the last several weeks, as many companies are dealing now with the anti-Asian sentiment and the experience of the more recent murders in Atlanta, which is emotional equity. And so I would say a lot of it is also, how are people feeling? So what is the sense? Because we're more than a number, but how do people actually feel as they maneuver through an organization? Do they feel that they are a part of and have the same opportunities? Do they feel included in all the ways in which we want to, which is very hard given this pandemic and the fact that we aren't together anyway. Right. But I would say that the emotional equity is a big piece.
Mm-hmm.
And Dani, I would add to what Dawn said just a little bit quickly, because I think it's an important part, that emotional equity. And I would love to say to all of our sisters on today's conference, and even some of our enlightened men who may have snuck in through the back door, in order to ensure that, Wellington has been helping people through diversity dialogues to really understand and have those courageous conversations and listening to how people experience different, let's say, subcultures, different teen cultures. We're talking about language and how language can help or hinder an authentic relationship between manager and direct report. We're talking about how the outside comes in, and that's very unique for a private institution who has stayed really out of the public eye and now said things are so atrocious. That's my word, not Wellington's word, but they're so messed up out there that we're going to get in. We're going to lean in. We're going to step up and figure out how we can understand how the events, like the events in Atlanta, like the events last summer, and that have gone on for years, how they are impacting different communities and how that hinders their ability to perform. And I hope some of our leaders are hearing that. I can't bring my best if I am worried about, you know, how do I navigate my next vacation so that I'm not pulled over and hurt? How do I navigate going to the grocery store so that I'm not assaulted? And our Latinas, our Asian women, our women of Black heritage, our LBGT women, they think about that every day. So to me, how do you know? I don't have to think like that around my psychological safety and my physical safety. I can just focus on being human.
And Sharhea, you want to add anything to that? Okay, go ahead. Oh, no, you're good.
Yeah, you can go. Yep.
Okay, so let me read this quote because this just came out in a report by McKinsey on women in the workplace, and they actually do a really great job of looking at all women. And so when they say women, they're not just looking at white women; they also are looking at Black women, Latina women, and then also the intersectionality that I think Sharhea was speaking to earlier that we experience as women of color. And this is a quote by a Black and Latina woman manager. There was a real silence after George Floyd happened. And I felt like that silence ripped open a wound that I didn't realize had been so deep. What was disappointing and what I heard from multiple Black colleagues was, quote, I have all these people who I work with every single day who I think care about me. But that week, we were mourning as a community and no one reached out. No one said a word. I kept thinking that one day somebody was going to say something, but no one did. It's like if you're on a tight-knit team and somebody has a family member pass away, you reach out, you send them a note, you do something, some gesture, because they're your coworker and they're also a human being. But no one I worked with did that after George Floyd. So when you're talking about emotional equity, psychological safety, and this dynamic goes on in your organization, you know, you as the chief diversity officer, I mean, I know you heard these incidents, either anecdotally or some sort of study behind it or enough. Would your organization do? Because if we aren't emotionally safe and psychologically safe, I think as Shawna was saying, then it is hard for us to perform at work and do the work we were hired to do. So this is a really critical part of equity. So what has your organization done, plans on doing, et cetera? Because as Don said, this isn't stopping. We just had the attacks on the Asians, the shooting last week or this week in Atlanta. So where are we on this in our organizations?
Wow. So I can just share, I know last summer, I mean, thinking about what you just read is still I'm still feeling it again. It's amazing how that does not go away. The fact that people, you know, are really feeling isolated in that space. I will say my CEO picked up the phone on a Sunday afternoon and called many of us senior leaders, Black leaders, after the death of the murder of George Floyd. And similarly, with the attack with our Asian American folks, he's done the same thing, and others have joined him. So what has been really wonderful is, for those of you who maybe knew Liberty Mutual for many, many years, you know, there was a culture of kindness, but of really sort of staying in some ways very, very polite. Financial services, we're not really expressing emotion. And we have really moved to a place where people recognize that silence is not an option, that it is actually worse than what people think. I'm just going to stay in my space. So what has happened for us is that we are making it real for people to recognize, to your point, Shawna, that we have to be human with each other, and that to not acknowledge the pain, just as we wouldn't acknowledge if one of our colleagues, lost someone or was dealing with something difficult, that it is necessary for creating that kind of climate for us to reach out and connect. And we are have hosted at all levels in the organization, leaders coming together, bringing their teams, even if they didn't have the right language or words. We said, this is not about perfection. Sometimes it is a little raggedy, and that's okay. It's, we think about the intent and give grace when people are trying to do the best. And I think that really has helped, especially during this pandemic, when people really need to feel that human connection.
Others.
I'll just add to say that, one of the shift that is really happening in this space is that we are seeing leaders being vulnerable, really admitting where they don't actually have the expertise. Like, they're at the top and they're really truly uncomfortable and never really understood how to have these conversations. But they're putting themselves out there, and the more that they put themselves out there, the further it goes down. Like, we see middle managers actually having real conversations with their staff about the issues that are happening in society, and really realizing again that what happens in the society is going to impact what I do on a day-to-day. And a lot of people in financial services in general love to keep that separate, right? We're like, we're data people, or we're business people. We're just straightforward. We go in and we work our 9 to 5, and then we leave, and then we go home. But that's never been true. And it's kind of interesting, right? Like, they've always said that, but you hear in the trading floor, people talk about their kids, people talk about what schools they're going to, et cetera, what after school program they have all these kind of general lived experiences that they share that are very similar white community, focus, and forgetting that our folks are literally suffering and seeing these images come across our screen on a daily basis. And I just even remember Trayvon Martin and the cases that those are still so fresh in our mind of how people reacted, and how, people didn't even think that would affect me, having that conversation, all those pieces. So I think, more and more we're seeing it. And even just this week, we had a session with our international CEO, Sharon, and made it very clear and made a statement says, if you're silent on racism, then you are racist. And when he said that, I know everyone in the room were like, whoa, he just said that. And
powerful.
it was a reminder that this organization needs a shift for everyone, right? Like, he is a white male saying this out loud in front of a global audience. That is a first for a company like this. We've been covering it, or we've layered in reasons why we don't want to talk about it, right? But that is definitely shifting. And I think that is part of the hard work that equity comes.
So Shawna, you want to say something on this?
So I want to draw out, I always get curious when people get frozen. And I would encourage all of us, no matter what seat you sit in, to get curious when people get frozen. I think about, even before 2020, the nightclub that was set on fire in Florida, largely Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, and the LGBTIQ community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our firm had an antenna go up then.
Yeah.
And that's when I started getting calls, Shawna, what should we do? What should we do? And I said, I'm going to take us back to the corporate values of the firm. You know what? We are a humanistic firm. The one thing that pleasantly surprised me 10 years ago when I joined Wellington is I looked at Wellington on the surface, but as I got to know my colleagues, they became friends. As they became friends, they became brothers and sisters. There's several of them on this call that they know. I call them Sister T, Mama Cindy, Brother Joe, Brother John, and that's terms of endearment. But that's me extending the olive branch because I know underpinning frozenness is fear.
Mm.
And so we have a term in DE&I leadership called getting comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I hear from my two colleagues on this panel, and Dani with you as well, is that we are helping organizations to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. But folks, I'm going to say this because it needs to be said. Getting comfortable with the uncomfortable doesn't mean carelessness. It means you do some of your own work. You don't call up Dawn, Dani, and Sharhea and say, you know, can you teach me about the Black pain porn? Okay. You don't go and watch a bunch of things and then say things that you've heard. You actually get educated and you ask for permission first to say, this is going to be a little messy, but I can't keep seeing and reading what I'm reading, and I need to talk to you about it. Are you okay with having this dialogue? So that's all I would add.
So I would ask then, taking this emotional element of equity and psychological safety and the environment that we're in today, and connecting it to tangible policies and practices and outcomes. So I know, Don, you mentioned earlier about the environmental, social, and corporate governance. Can you talk a little bit and share with us what Liberty's doing in that space to really, you know, connect these pieces? Because one is emotional, the other is the reality of how our world works, right?
Absolutely, and I would say we're early days. So our ESG office was just established at the end of 2019, and so many people might think of, you know, ESG from an environmental perspective. That's often where, you know, people focus. They're looking at, you know, our carbon footprint and all of that. What I've said from the very beginning, and what continues to be so true for many people, is that when you're talking about diversity, we're talking about everyone. When people are involved, DEI is involved, whether you are leveraging it or not. And so the opportunity that we have is to look at the products and services that we create, and to really look at, are all people having access to those products and services? So often when people think about this work, they think about, what do they think of? Talent. They think about internal organizations in terms of hiring and retention and promotion, and all of those things, as we, you know, those are so key, obviously. And yet that's not all. So if you think about this more broadly, and that's why I was sharing about equity when we think about ESG, it really is also about the communities where we live and where we serve, and really looking at, you know, who we support, and the customers, are they in spaces where they are safe and feeling that their property, the things that they cherish and care about, are also protected. And as an insurance company, obviously that's important to us. And so it does require thinking differently, perhaps, and really not only applying all of the analytics that, you know, clearly drives us, but also sort of connecting both that, you know, kind of heart and mind to the work, to think about our customers in a broader way. So again, early days, but that is an important part of this work.
Yeah, one of the things we've been doing at Mass General Brigham, I have always said this work is not just about human resources. If you're just focusing on human resources, then you're doing a third of the work, right? That it is much broader than that. And we were in the process of building 5 ambulatory sites around the state, new. And I said, I'd like to be on the design committee so that we build inclusive organizations, inclusive healthcare sites from the ground up. It's a wonderful opportunity to look at how do we attract people into our healthcare centers and they feel included, they feel like they belong, because these are patients, right, from all our different communities. And so we had great, robust discussions with communities, designing these sites so that aesthetically they were right, so that they had gender neutral restrooms in them, so that they had accessibility in terms of people who had disabilities, and just also so that there was representation in terms of healthcare providers, right? Who'd you see at the front desk? Who are we going to see at the front desk? And so when we think about equity in its broader sense, it's really looking across the spectrum in that way for us. But Shawna, you go and talk about how it's working and playing out at Wellington from an internal perspective. I know you touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, so Dani, thank you, because listening to you and Dawn is triggering just how broad and how much we've been leaning into equity, both inside out. And what I would say is, earlier I described kind of a few examples of how we're trying to make sure, from an equitable access to resources, programs and solutions, we are on that journey and actually implementing tangible things like the Groundbreakers program, like emerging leaders programs and individual coaching that individuals might need. But if I go to the broader side, the outside in, I would say that we're taking a holistic approach with implementing programs like our HBCU Scholars Program that is multi-tiered and multifaceted, that is not just looking to offer internships, but is also looking to offer tuition scholarships to enable students to get interested in asset management and all the different careers we offer. We're taking away, back to that justice point around financial barriers, by saying we're going to pay for 2 years, your junior and your senior year if you come to Wellington. We're also looking at things like, how can we use our positional power of influence when we think about investing in firms that may be Black and Brown owned? We have just launched a diverse founders fund at Wellington. So we're going to invest back in the Black and Brown communities by opening our Rolodex to make sure that they have those networks, by getting them access to capital. Those types of things, so that the businesses that are in the communities where we work and live, they see that we're not just looking to pull talent for us, but that we're also reinvesting. And then I would say, using our influence, and this is something any firm can do, to say, if we're going to do business together, we want to see more women on boards. I mean, all of us sisters are here today to talk about the challenges that we face as women from a mosaic of backgrounds. Right. So our ESG team, and Dawn, I'm happy to connect you with a couple of them. They're a powerhouse of men and women. But they wrote a letter and reached out to over 200 firms and said, we want to know what your board diversity looks like, and where's the gender diversity within that mix, and women coming in all shapes and sizes. So I would say we're putting heart, head, and hands to this work, and some tangible strategies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Sharhea, what about State Street in terms of the work they've been doing in supplier diversity?
Yeah, definitely. So just holistically, just thinking about, we had launched 10 actions to address racism and inequality last summer. And so that has been work that we've been ongoing. But going back, just because I know we're short on time, I'll just talk about specifically about supplier diversity and how we're leveraging our power as a global organization to make sure we influence the next step. So one of the pieces that you just alluded to, Shawna, is asset stewardship work that we've been doing around the Fearless Girl. And we've been very adamant about voting against boards that don't have women and the success that has made. And so we're now launching that into a racial diversity. And so, State Street's very proud of announcing 2 additions to their board in the last couple of weeks that has that racial diversity. So a Black and a Latinx individual has been added to the board. So that's really exciting. And then in terms of supply diversity specifically, we're leveraging our influence. We're a global company that can't unwind contracts pretty fast. So if anyone knows what that means, we're talking about cybersecurity issues, lots of onboarding issues that happen. And so how we're leveraging that, we're basically, requiring our tier 1 suppliers to look further and being intentional about their tier 2 supplier stream. So like what the products that come into their, to get to what they're given to us on the tier 1, and then also like reporting back. So the accountability that works both ways. So you're being intentional on any new tier 1 spend that we have coming in, but the ones that we already have. And then the last one I'll mention is around, we're talking about business as usual. Is there things that we're doing business as usual that we can change and shift how we're doing it? And so just recently, State Street did a debt offering of $850 million, and it's the first US bank to have more than 50% of its deal underwritten by a minority-owned firm, and that is a Black and a Latinx firm. And so that is very being intentional about debt offering that we already do as a bank and as a firm. How are we making sure we shift the mindset? And then we're thinking about the multiplier effect. We're giving everyone the handbook of what we did in that deal and how we structured that deal. And one thing everyone would tell you in that process, it was not hard. It was just being intentional about the selection of the firms that's in that syndicate. So, so those are the things that we're really doing and being intentional, giving back, not just giving back as community, but just more about being intentional about our spend here at State Street.
Well, that's impressive, actually, and the work that you're doing. All the companies in terms of the work that you're doing. You know, we have a saying in DE&I that what gets measured gets done, right? And so, where is your company around metrics? Whether it's metrics around external or internal metrics, what are you seeing that's worked in your company? How have people reacted to creating metrics, or hiring, promotion, or even in terms of your external efforts? What have you had to manage around metrics?
Yeah, I'll jump in because we may be the newest to the list here as I think about where my colleagues are. So, you know, like many organizations last year, we knew we had to accelerate the work that we were doing. We're a private organization, so there are things that we don't have to do. But we felt it was really important for us to move forward in terms of driving greater accountability. We needed more transparency. So for the first time, we did share our US demographic data with the entire organization. We also posted it externally as well. And, you know, we've got work to do. We very clearly, one could see as we broke out, not just people of color, but by race and ethnicity, where we had opportunity. We also set up and delivered our very first representation goals for increasing more women and people of color into the organization, giving out, you know, 2025 as a sort of a milestone, but also longer term goals. And so I know many organizations have been doing that. This is a first for Liberty Mutual. And as you can well imagine, requires a lot of understanding, communication around what that means and what we're doing to actually address those gaps. But we're putting it out there because we know that is the way we're going to be able to make the kind of change that we want to see.
Okay.
And, you know, Dani, if I could carry along what Dawn is saying to just give some more tangible examples that firms can take back and think about doing for themselves. So transparency, Dawn, absolutely, my sister friend. That's key. And I think that starts the conversation. I think it starts the awareness. And at Wellington, one of the things that we challenged ourselves, because we started a diversity dashboard that measures, you know, topics of gender, topics of the individual race classification. So little hint, folks, don't put all people of color together when you're measuring. That's a cheat, okay? Catch yourself, don't cheat. It's like a workout plan. Can't have donuts over here and diet soda over here, okay? So one of the things we did is we said, okay, how do we level up from giving transparency to the data, similar to what Dawn said, and we infuse accountability. So this year, we've just started to have some accountability, what I'm calling an accountability process, where we are looking at trends by business leader. So for some of you, that's platform leader, some of you, it's divisional leader. Trends the last 3 to 5 years of how have we performed around the representation of talent, the D, around the inclusivity of talent, the I, through talent engagement survey feedback. And then looking at equity as around what do we need to do to move, if we look at forecasting, what do we need to do to remove some barriers and make sure those numbers continue to move. So we have just started that with some of our business leaders, even this quarter, and they are meeting with their senior leadership team, our head of HR, myself as the DE&I officer for the firm, and our chair of our DE&I committee, so that we're having it as a collaborative versus punitive conversation on what does it take? What do we need to do? And even, I give our president, Steve Clark, credit for his questionings in this process where he said, so what's standing in the way and how can I help remove obstacles? Leaders, that is invested leadership. Yeah. That moves us from transactional bean counting, or jelly bean counting, as I like to call it, to invested leadership saying, what do you need from me for you to achieve your DE&I goals?
Yeah. So go ahead, Shira.
And I just want to add one other tangible thing that I think firms can also engage in. So we just signed up to be part of the management leadership for tomorrow's Black Equity at Work certification process. And if people are not familiar with that, but they have partnered with Boston consulting firm to kind of create a standard. So many question, like, what does that look like in your firm? How do you know your firm got there? And one of the reasons that we decided to engage in that, some of the questions we were getting from employees to say, like, is this just a hot topic for now? Is it just temporary? Are you doing this for real? We've had diversity metrics for some time now, et cetera. Is this gonna stick? And so I think, we were being intentional about looking for a program like this, where it's almost like a mini audit on your firm. It's taking that step back to say, like, what is externally does that look like? Is there data we can compare ourselves to as well, where we can just make sure we're on the right journey? And so they have created these 5 specific pillars, and I'm going to read them out. Representation, as we mentioned, inclusive and anti-racist work environment, employee compensation, racially just business practices, and then racially justice contributions and investments. And so those are the 5 pillars that they're measuring for us to really, talk about Black equity. And so when you see those big headlines, billions of dollars to this and billions of dollars to that, what does that really mean? And so if you are really interested in that and just kind of like wanting to take something back to your firm about what they can do, they should definitely look into that program as well.
Yeah, and so when we're looking at the numbers, what I've discovered when I first arrived at Mass General Brigham, we were not looking at HR through demographic lens. And I was raising the issue about, then how do you know if people are experiencing the environment in an equitable and equal way and having the same work experience, lived work experience. And it took me a while to get them comfortable with really looking at HR data through that lens and talent data through that lens. What I learned is I had to build the analytical competency of leaders in this space, because what was really getting in the barrier there was their emotional connection or lack of to this work. And so how do you help leaders unpackage when they have that distance between the numbers and, they're nodding their head and they're saying yes, but something else is going on with that leader that has nothing to do with the numbers. And you need to open that dialogue. How have you been able to accomplish some of that and do that? Because it plays into equity in a big way.
Dawn, do you want to take this or you want me to?
Yeah, Shawna, why don't you go? I've been jumping in first.
So I'll start it and both of you can carry it through. So I think one of the first ways I started was really to listen to what is that leader really care about, what's getting in the way, try to understand how they're motivated. So like some of our leaders are really motivated by achieving results in their client service. So one year we looked at client RFPs, RFIs, and we said, you know, between a 3-year span, we went from 15% of our clients asking about the diversity makeup of their investment teams and so on and so forth to 25%. And I instantly got this person's attention because I said, listen, I'm a simple gal. I'm not as smart as you, but you either want to increase your market share, maintain the status quo, or you want to crush it and knock it out. Or you want to give it away. Like those are your options. And so that leader said to me, I get it, because he was very business focused, and we have all learned as D&I leaders to meet them where they're at. The other piece that happened for us at Wellington is some of our leaders just lead with their heart. And that video of hearing George call for his mama triggered so many people that we started a Becoming Allies group made up of people all across the firm who said, I care about this and I don't want this happening in my generation, in my time. Enough is enough. Years ago, we had the same thing happen with another group of allies called Upstanders. They were male allies saying there aren't enough female partners in this firm. How can we be male champions for change and help kind of get connected, because we're not as connected to the women's issues and how they experience difference at this firm. So some of it is really listening and tapping into what is it that they need in order to open their experience around difference. So I'll stop there because I'm sure my two colleagues have something to add.
Yeah.
Shawna, I mean, great efforts. And we're doing some very similar things. We have, we recognize that, again, a lot of our leaders are very analytical. And so there is a way to look at the numbers and have it just stay as numbers.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the work is also some training around helping them move from the numbers to really understanding them at a heart level, at an emotional level, and then really understand what are the actions. Because sometimes it's like, okay, I see the numbers, they don't look good. What do I do with this? Yeah. And really helping them recognize that there are actions, there are strategies we can create to make change. We do not have to live with the same thing, status quo, year after year. And some of that is also involving, you know, again, we have a Men as Allies initiative where we're actually having many of our white men coming together to really challenge themselves around the bias. So if they look at these numbers, in some cases, people aren't surprised. Well, what does that mean? Why shouldn't we be surprised that we don't have equal access and opportunity for people moving along? So to your point, it's helping really train so that it's beyond the numbers. Just as people learn when they go to business school to understand how to interpret what they see and then take that to action and recognize we don't have to just be stuck, if you will, with the way that this looks. We can make change. There is a way to make change, and give them examples, celebrate those when they happen, tell others, so that, again, we're able to sort of make this a movement across. But a lot of it is this heart, as I love it, hand, heart, mind. So it doesn't just, we're not just operating in one way, because these are people's lives that we're looking at when we look at these numbers.
So I'm going to shift because we only have a few minutes left, and I want to get this in because this is a women's conference. So what can we as women do to support other women so that they are breaking through some of these equity issues?
Can I start?
No, that's another workshop, right?
No.
But very quickly.
Yeah. So the first session actually talked a little about this, about giving feedback. And I just want to shout out Shawna because, you know, in the last couple of weeks, I called her and about something, and she literally just give me the real deal about feedback, what I can do to move forward, you know, and what I could. So just that moment of reality of having that type of mentorship, informal and formal, wherever that is. And I think that is what we can do as women, kind of bringing this work into the space. So if you're not even in D&I, but just how you do it in wherever you are, whatever space you're in, just kind of like making sure that you are looking back and seeing like, who can I talk to, who can I mentor, who can I sponsor, right? And be able to kind of leverage, because you now have the voice, right? You have the voice in the position. How can you do that better? So I think that's what I would kind of bring to the space, and just kind of thank Shawna for even doing that for me. And we just met like, you know, in this last year, and just kind of like understanding where I'm at, where I need to grow, and what I need to do next. So thank you.
So Shawna, how about you? Well, I know this is a.
I know I'm going to do lightning round for you.
Okay.
So what I would say is I'm not going to repeat what Sharhea said. It's yes and.
Okay.
It starts with our mindset, ladies. Okay, if you go back through history, my mom was a history teacher. I'm daughter of a Marine and a teacher. Women make change happen. We do run the world. And so it starts with your mindset. How do you see that the woman executive, your peer, as your sister? That's how you move towards action. If she wins, we all win. And what can you do to shift your mindset from there? That will lead you to coaching. That will lead you to training. That will lead you to being a connector, as Malcolm Gladwell teaches us. That will lead you to doing so many things versus being a transactional leader. I'll stop there.
Okay, Don, you got 30 seconds.
Okay, I'm going to make it really practical, because I'm going to say yes and to my sisters here. Sometimes we're getting so busy and we think, how can we make it happen? And I'll tell you, I'm one who's basically in front of my monitor always. I got stickies. What I try to do is think about who are maybe 2 or 3 women I want to basically say, I see you, I support you, I'm there, hang in there, I know it's hard. And so I write their names, and throughout the day, I'm seeing their names, and I'll just send them a little note, and it's a quick one. It might be a smiley face. It might be just like, hey, hang in there. And it just makes it really practical. And then sort of, again, just on the heels of what my sisters have been saying, it makes it real. And I know I've gotten them from people, and it has helped. Honestly, it has helped.
Yeah. So my sisters and colleagues in the fight that we do every day in our organizations, thank you so much. Your wisdom and your generosity of spirit, I appreciate. And so I have some duties here, and thank you, audience, for being with us. We want to thank our sponsors in terms of State Street, Mass General Brigham, Liberty Mutual, PNC Bank, Wellington Management, Cambridge Savings Bank, Eastern Bank, the Greater Chamber of Boston, the Dinner Group, and Cultural Solutions. Thank you, all of our supporters. We also want to encourage you to go to the Career Exhibitors Room from 1 to 3 today. Check out what's going on. There may be some great opportunities there for you. And then to also participate in the next panel. And with that, I thank you. I'm Dani Monroe, your moderator and Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for Mass General Brigham. So thanks, everyone. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.